I thought spring break would be a homecoming. Instead, I found an empty house, a for sale sign, and my life stuffed into garbage bags on the porch. No warning, no goodbye, just silence where my family used to be. Standing in front of that abandoned home, I realized something deeper than betrayal was waiting to unfold. I stood on the cracked pavement, clutching the straps of my backpack as the wind carried dust across the lawn where I'd once played tag with my little brother. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Cold. Abandoned. Lifeless. I walked up the porch steps, heart pounding, and nudged one of the garbage bags with my foot. My AP government textbook peeked out beneath a pair of jeans. I sank to my knees and opened the bag fully. My clothes. My photo albums. A handmade birthday card from middle school. All crammed together like leftovers after a garage sale. My name is Jasmine Rojas. I'm a pre-law student at Western California University, and I was raised to believe that if I worked hard, stayed out of trouble, and made my family proud, I'd always have a place to come home to. I had a 3.9 GPA. I sent part of my scholarship money home every month. I never partied, never rebelled. I followed every rule, every expectation, and still they left me. I called my dad first. He answered with the same tone he used when I used to ask for rides to school. Flat. Irritated. Unmoved. "We moved," he said simply, as if that explained everything. "You're an adult now. Deal with it." The call ended before I could process the words. I tried calling my mom. Voicemail. My brother. No response. My Uncle Thomas, when I finally reached him, just said they'd packed up last week and assumed I would have known. That they figured I wouldn't be around anyway. As if my life at college gave them permission to erase me. I loaded the 3 trash bags into the trunk of my car, blinking fast to keep the tears from spilling over. Not yet. I needed a place to sleep. A motel. Somewhere cheap. I found one a few miles from the freeway and laid out my salvaged belongings on the lumpy bedspread. That's when the shock started to melt, giving way to a new kind of clarity. They didn't just move. They moved on. Without telling me. Without thinking about what that would mean. And the most devastating part? They didn't even think I'd care. That night, I stared at the ceiling and made a quiet promise to myself. If they could walk away from me so easily, I would do the same. I would build something of my own. Something stronger. Something no one could throw in a garbage bag. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. I sat by the small desk with the buzzing lamp, staring at my phone, wondering if I had imagined it all. Maybe there had been a message I missed, a warning buried in some email or text. But there was nothing. Just the quiet confirmation that my family had made a decision. And that decision didn't include me. The next morning I called Professor Wilkins, my constitutional law instructor. She had always been more than a teacher to me. Someone who saw past my quiet nature and recognized the fire I tried so hard to hide. "They moved?" she repeated, stunned. "Without telling you?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Left my stuff in garbage bags. Just left." There was a long silence on the line before she finally spoke again. "Come stay with me." "I can't. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," she said firmly. "Come stay. Until your dorm reopens. We'll figure things out together." That single act of kindness cracked something open inside me. Not grief, but something stronger, resolve. Her house was nothing like the one I'd grown up in. It was quiet, filled with the scent of lavender and lined wall to wall with towering bookshelves. There were 2 elderly cats who treated me like furniture, and a guest room with warm blankets and a window that faced a small garden. "You don't have to pretend here," she said one night over chamomile tea. "You don't have to prove anything. Just be." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until the tears finally came. Not because I was weak, but because I was safe. During the day, I threw myself into studying and volunteering. Professor Wilkins had pulled some strings and secured me a summer internship with Riverton Law Partners, a legal nonprofit that specialized in housing discrimination. The irony wasn't lost on me. A girl with nowhere to live helping others stay in their homes. But it gave me purpose. Meaning. Every intake form. Every story I heard from clients being pushed out of their apartments or cheated by landlords felt like fuel. I was no longer just a student picking up the pieces of her life. I was building something new, something that mattered. At Riverton, I was supposed to be doing basic intern tasks, filing, note-taking, shadowing attorneys during intake sessions. But something shifted when I sat in on my first real client meeting. A young mother named Marissa clutched a folder full of eviction notices. Her toddler played silently beside her, oblivious to the looming crisis. "They said I missed rent," Marissa whispered, eyes darting. "But I have the receipts. I paid. Every time." Something about the way she said it, that quiet desperation, felt too familiar. After the meeting, my supervisor, attorney Eleanor Grayson, turned to me. "You stayed quiet, but you were watching. What did you see?" I took a deep breath. She's not lying. The numbers on her payment ledger don't match the landlord's notice. "I think they're falsifying late fees." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Good eye." From that moment she gave me more responsibility, more space to speak, more trust. By the end of the summer, I wasn't just filing. I was leading intake sessions, organizing case files, and even drafting response letters. Eleanor once said to me, "Jasmine, most interns try to impress. You try to understand. That's rarer than you think." One evening, after reviewing 3 files about illegal evictions in the same complex, I stayed late, typing furiously, cross-referencing dates, maps, and lease clauses. When Eleanor popped her head in at 9 p.m. and saw me surrounded by papers, she just smiled. "You're not just learning law," she said. "You're finding your fight." And I was. Every person we helped felt like I was stitching myself back together. Every win, even small ones, gave me back a piece of my voice. Then, during a required university seminar, a single slide lit up the screen. Social innovation grants, $25,000 available for student-led initiatives addressing community need. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. By the 3rd night, I had the first draft of a proposal. The Safe Space Initiative, a legal advocacy program for students and low-income tenants facing housing insecurity. Eleanor helped fine-tune the legal sections. Professor Wilkins reviewed the draft line by line. When I clicked submit, I wasn't just applying for funding. I was drawing a line between the girl who was left on a porch with garbage bags and the woman who was building something no one could take away. 2 weeks after submitting my Safe Space Initiative proposal, I got the email. "Congratulations. You've been selected as a finalist." I read it 3 times before it sank in. Then I stood up in Professor Wilkins' kitchen, tears pooling in my eyes, and whispered, "I think it's really happening." She smiled softly. "Of course it is. You're the kind of person who turns pain into structure, into change." We hugged. Then we sat at her worn dining table and got to work preparing the pitch. But even in the glow of this breakthrough, the past had claws. 6 months had passed since the day I'd found my things in trash bags. But suddenly the messages started again. First came the voicemail from my father. "Jasmine, your mother's been worried. Call us." Then another, angrier. "This silent treatment is childish. We're your family." I said nothing. I responded to nothing. Because there was nothing to say. They weren't calling out of love. They were calling because they'd lost control. And somehow they sensed that I'd found mine. The week I learned that the Safe Space Initiative was selected for funding, I also learned something else. My old neighbor, Mrs. Hernandez, called out of the blue. "Jasmine," she said gently. "I didn't want to get involved, but something strange happened." She explained that someone had broken into our old house. Or what used to be our house. It had been vacant, still owned by my parents. "The police came," she continued, "and they found an envelope. It was addressed to you." My heart stopped. What was in it? Legal documents. From a firm in Mexico. Something about your grandmother's estate. I asked her to open it. When she read the contents, I sat down in shock. It turns out my late grandmother had left me property, which had since been sold. The proceeds? Over $400,000. Finalized last March. 1 month before my parents vanished. Suddenly the pieces clicked. Their move wasn't just out of shame or distance. It was strategy. They'd known. They'd kept it secret. And they'd left me behind hoping I'd never find out. I hung up with Mrs. Hernandez and called the law firm myself. The inheritance was real. The money was mine. And in that moment I realized, my parents hadn't just abandoned me, they tried to erase me. The discovery of my grandmother's inheritance shattered any lingering doubts I had about my parents' motives. Their betrayal wasn't rooted in desperation. It was premeditated, strategic, and cold. I hadn't just been forgotten. I'd been excluded. I spent that night pacing in my tiny bedroom at Professor Wilkins' house, the official letter from the Mexican law firm in one hand, and my phone in the other. My voicemail inbox was full of messages from numbers I recognized all too well. I didn't listen to a single one. Instead, I opened my laptop and began drafting a timeline, not for revenge but for clarity. I needed to see it laid out. The scholarship, the money I sent home, the trash bags, the inheritance letter dated 1 month before I was cut out of their lives. Each fact carved a deeper groove into my resolve. They hadn't failed me by accident. They'd planned it. I wanted to forget. I wanted to leave it behind. But the Safe Space Initiative had taught me that healing doesn't come from pretending it never happened. Healing comes from reclaiming what was stolen, not just the money but the dignity, the voice, the worth they tried to strip away. And just as I had begun laying the groundwork for justice in other people's lives, I realized I owed it to myself too. At the advice of Eleanor, my mentor at Riverton Law Partners, I called the estate attorney in Mexico again and requested confirmation of who had been contacted about the inheritance before me. The answer confirmed my worst suspicion. The first notification was sent to your parents as your legal guardians, the lawyer explained. They signed for it. There it was. Proof. They had known all along. When I told Professor Wilkins, she simply placed a hand over mine and said, "Jasmine, you don't owe anyone grace when they gave you none." I nodded, finally understanding. Forgiveness is a gift, not a duty. 3 days later, the Watkins Foundation sent an invitation. We were to present Safe Space Initiative in person to the board next Saturday. If we were successful, the funding could expand our program citywide. It was the biggest moment of my professional life. So of course, that's the day my parents chose to show up again. I was mid-sentence, explaining Safe Space Initiative's outreach strategy to the Watkins Foundation board, when the conference room door opened. A staff member leaned in, whispering to the director. His brows lifted in surprise before he turned toward me. "Ms. Rojas, I'm sorry to interrupt," he said gently. "There are 3 individuals in the lobby claiming to be your immediate family. They say it's urgent." My heart didn't race. It didn't sink. It settled heavy but solid. I turned slightly, meeting Eleanor's eyes. She gave a subtle nod. My voice remained even as I answered, "Please let them know I'll speak with them after we've concluded the presentation." There was a flicker of respect in Mr. Watkins' eyes before he gestured for me to continue. For the next 15 minutes, I channeled every ounce of pain, every slight, and every injustice into clarity. I spoke not just of our mission but of the people we served, the students, the displaced families, the forgotten renters, all fighting for the right to simply stay. The board listened intently, and when we finished, they thanked us with warm handshakes and said we'd hear back within 2 weeks. Outside the boardroom in the foundation's reception area, my mother stood first. She looked smaller than I remembered. My father sat with his arms crossed, as unreadable as ever. Gabriel lingered beside them, avoiding eye contact. "Jasmine," my mother said, her voice tight with emotion. "We saw the article. The one about your program. We had no idea how much you've done." I kept my tone steady. "Why are you here?" "We want to make things right," she said, stepping forward. "We made a mistake." I didn't flinch. "A mistake is burning dinner. What you did was abandon your daughter and hide her inheritance." Gabriel finally looked up. "Jazz, we were wrong. I told them." I studied him. He looked sincere, but sincerity didn't undo what was done. "I'm not here to relitigate the past," I said quietly. "But if this is about the money, let's be clear. You don't get to benefit from what you tried to steal." My father's jaw tightened. "We're still your family." "No," I corrected. "Family doesn't leave you in a driveway with your life in trash bags." I paused, then added, "You taught me how to fight. But I learned how to stand on my own." Without waiting for their response, I turned and walked out. Not angry, not vindictive. Just finished. As I stepped out into the warm spring sunlight, the door to the past quietly clicked shut behind me. My heels clicked across the pavement, steady and purposeful, each step carrying me farther from the versions of myself they had once tried to define. The obedient daughter, the quiet sacrificer, the invisible child. Back at the office that afternoon, Eleanor greeted me with a mug of tea already waiting on my desk. "You handled that with more grace than most full-fledged litigators," she said, smiling. "That kind of composure under pressure? It's rare." I didn't say anything right away. I just stared at the steam rising from the mug. It smelled like cinnamon and strength. "Thank you," I said, finally, my voice low, "for all of it." Later that evening, as I reviewed our caseload backlog, my phone buzzed with a new email. The subject line read, "Watkins Foundation decision." I froze. Clicking it open, my eyes scanned the message once, then twice, then a third time just to be sure. "Congratulations." The word glowed on the screen. We'd received the full grant amount. Not just the base $300,000, but an additional $50,000 for operational expansion. Safe Space Initiative was officially going national. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and sank back into my chair, the enormity of what we had accomplished finally washing over me. Just as I was about to call Eleanor, my phone lit up again, this time with a different number. Unknown. Local. I debated for a moment, then declined the call. A voicemail came in seconds later. I tapped to listen. It was my father. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I saw the news segment. I didn't know it would make it to national TV. I didn't know you'd done all that. Jasmine, we're proud. We just didn't know how to say it back then. If you ever want to talk." I hit delete before he finished. The validation wasn't necessary anymore. Not from them. Not from anyone who hadn't stayed. I looked around the office. Photos of families we'd helped lined one wall. A vision board of goals for next year covered another. These people had chosen me, and I had chosen myself. The following weekend, I stood in front of a rented auditorium filled with students, families, and community members. We were hosting Safe Space Initiative's first official town hall, a place for people to learn their rights, ask questions, and share stories. I opened the event with a simple statement. This organization was born out of loss, but what we've built here is proof that even when people fail you, systems ignore you, and support disappears, you can still create something powerful from the ashes. Applause filled the room, not for me, but for every person who had shown up to fight for their dignity. As I walked off the stage, I spotted Professor Wilkins and Eleanor near the front row, both beaming. After the event, I stayed behind to help clean up. One of our new interns, a freshman named Nia, approached me, eyes wide with admiration. "Jasmine, can I ask you something?" she said. "How did you do it? How did you build all this after everything that happened to you?" I looked at her, reminded of a younger version of myself, one who still believed love was owed just because it was family. "I stopped waiting for the apology," I said, "and I started writing my own future." That night, I returned home to my small apartment and sat on the balcony. The city lights blinked quietly below, as if nodding in approval. I pulled out the letter from the law firm in Mexico one more time. The inheritance had cleared weeks ago, the funds resting in an untouched account. Not out of fear, but because I was waiting for the right use. And now I knew. The next morning, I started the paperwork to turn Safe Space Initiative into a nonprofit foundation. Fully independent, fully funded. I earmarked a portion of the inheritance for emergency housing grants, the rest to establish satellite offices in 3 other cities. My family never called again, and I didn't expect them to, but I kept the voicemail from my father, not out of sentimentality but as a reminder that I had once been considered disposable, and a reminder of the strength it took to prove them wrong. Not with revenge but with resilience. As I filed the final documents and hit submit, I felt it, the quiet click of a new chapter opening. I hadn't just survived. I had built something no one could ever throw away.